Welcome to the Adult Basic Skills Professional Development video series. Throughout our productions, we are committed to excellence in adult education and professional development in basic skills instruction. The goal of this video series is to improve the effectiveness and quality of instruction through focused professional development.
Lesson planning. How I have agonized over writing this script. There's so much controversy over how to plan effective lessons to maximize learning for adult students. Should we use the Hunter model, beginning with the anticipatory set and ending with closure and then doing all the steps in between? Or should the lessons be constructed around student input, taking shape as the class progresses? Should lessons be totally structured? Or should they be flexible enough to change with our students, or with the wind, as the saying goes? Besides all these decisions, what adult basic instructor has time to plan, or the materials and all the resources necessary to have an ideal lesson? You know, another factor in our ABS classes is the diversity of students. All ages, needs, motivation levels, and interest are represented. And we are supposed to plan ideal lessons that are effective.
This video is designed to help you cope with the numerous decisions you must make to prepare effective lessons for your students. We will investigate ways of planning that will make the class both effective and efficient for adults. But is it really that simple? When we work with adults, we have other factors to consider. For instance, their own goals must play a major role in establishing class objectives and consequently lesson plans. Adults have reasons for returning to classes and expect to see results from their participation based on their reasons for being there. They bring with them a rich background of experiences that need to be incorporated into their learning. Relevance is most important to the adult learner. The traditional model of lesson planning requires two assessments, the initial one determining the learner's entry level and the final one determining growth or competency level as a result of instruction. In this plan, you begin by testing the student to find out what they already know. As the instructor, you are aware of the level of knowledge the student is expected to have in order to be competent in meeting the objective. It is now your responsibility to determine the exact instructional objective. If you do not know what is to be accomplished, how will you know if it has been accomplished? Adult learning is the process for change. The instructional goals and objectives that direct classroom lessons need to describe the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor changes we expect from our adults. They describe what your students are expected to know, do, and feel when they complete the lesson. They also state the real-life application expected of adults. When determining class objectives, too often we rely solely on established competencies, neglecting the student's individual goals in the planning process. The established competencies are necessary and have been written based on the knowledge and skills that adults need for interacting in society. However, they are only a beginning. To retain our adult students, we must plan lessons around their perceived needs and goals, step into their world, and provide lessons that are meaningful to them. Establish a win-win class by stating objectives positively. For instance, you will be able to interpret a paragraph rather than you will not continue to be confused when reading a paragraph. After developing appropriate learning objectives, you may need to group similar objectives together as an umbrella for the whole class instruction. We have such a diverse group of students with a wide range of needs that in essence we could be teaching a different lesson to each person. Besides being impractical and ineffective, there is insufficient time to plan specific lessons for each individual. Plan whole group lessons in which you present a concept, then use peer tutoring or group work for students to work with each other. Group work is so important because learning takes place when students put information into their own words. Students internalize the content when they verbalize it through group discussion. Often after the class begins, we realize that the objective we planned is composed of multiple tasks. They may need to be divided into component parts with an objective for each task. Each component will be treated as a mini lesson. At the end of the series of lessons, the students demonstrate their competency. You must plan carefully to ensure that students' learning needs are being met. The best lesson plan can flop if we don't address special needs. For instance, mathophobia or spellingitis undermined learning of many students. Think about these and other beliefs students may have about learning and address them in your planning. Now you must decide on content, which consists of knowledge from the past combined with vision for the future. The content may be information or facts, or it may be a skill the student is expected to demonstrate. It may deal with trends in education, such as critical thinking, workplace literacy, holistic reading, and global issues. Whatever the content is to be learned, it should be taught in a context of interest to your adults. This is particularly true of lessons focusing on skills. They can be taught in the context of racing, gardening, music, or family matters. A major part of the lesson planning process is the selection of teaching strategies. Strategies should match the learning objective. A perfectly good strategy for one objective may be ineffective for another. Learning strategies should be varied and sequenced in an order that makes sense. Balance listening with discussion. Balance quiet with active learning. Intersperse information segments with physical involvement. It is appropriate to begin a lesson with a strategy that requires the learner to draw on their prior experiences and knowledge. Use this approach to present the new concepts. After planning the appropriate strategies for teaching the identified content, you then decide what materials or resources are needed and assess their availability. Many effective lessons can be planned for adult learners using materials and resources from their environment. These include magazines, newspapers, work forms, manuals, and even easily read books available from the public library. All materials should be handy, of good quality, and ready to use. You need to have sufficient manipulatives or handouts that are easily read at the learner's instructional level. When planning a lesson, it is important to have proper resources ready and available for the class. The instructor may write out a list of materials and equipment needed to successfully teach the objective. Good instructors remember to plan for flexibility in terms of resources such as space, time, and equipment. Other mishaps occur that cause the best of lesson plans to fail. Ordered materials don't always arrive in time. Schedules may overlap, and copiers sometimes break down. Well-conceived lesson plans make flexibility easier when problems with materials and equipment do arise. Every effective lesson begins with getting the student's attention. Lesson planning includes introducing the topic so that both you and the students are prepared to learn. You design a special means of involving your students in the content from the beginning of class. You know, plan a grabber. Next, you need to plan how the presentation is to proceed. A variety of strategies can and should be used. There is never a lack of interesting ways to present information, but even the most innovative presentation can fall flat when it is inadequately prepared. No lesson plan is complete without assessment. Assess your students before you plan the lesson to determine their knowledge base. Continuously assess during instruction and make adjustments throughout the lesson to meet student learning needs. At the end of the lesson, you need to know how well your students have met the learning objective, as well as your teaching strengths and weaknesses. Often overlooked in assessment is the fact that it indicates how well you taught the content. Of course, assessment from one lesson directs the planning of your next class. Your next lesson depends on how well your students met the current objective. Do you have an evidence procedure for evaluating the lesson? How will you know when the objective has been reached? This means your students will be able to demonstrate the procedure in class. They should also be able to transfer the information or procedure to situations at home or in the workplace. Time is another factor that must be considered when doing lesson plans. You need to carefully plan the pace of the lesson. It should neither drag nor move so quickly that material is merely covered rather than learned. If you find the lesson dragging, it is probably time to switch gears. It is also necessary to plan for your students to have time to integrate the content across other learning domains. Knowing your adults, you can estimate how much time should be allotted to each phase of the lesson. Planning time for processing is important. Insufficient time to understand the content overwhelms the adult learner. To prevent this from happening, intersperse processing time throughout the lesson. Adults can then integrate this information with their current knowledge and experiences, making it more meaningful to them. As you assign time frames to your plan, you may find that you have too much lesson for the allotted time or too much time for the planned lesson. You may find that your objective is too broad and needs to be simplified, or too narrow and needs to be expanded. At times, you will find the need to span a lesson across 2 or more class periods. You need to complete the lesson plan by assigning the time frames for each part of the lesson. At the end of class, adults need to know what they have accomplished. Lesson planning includes determining the sociological factors that affect learning in the class. You need to analyze the strategies to decide at what points in the lesson students should be working alone, in pairs, and in groups. Even large groups work best when the numbers are below 15. If tasks are long-term, decide if the team will work together for its entirety or for just a short period of time. According to learning theory, we learn best when we teach someone else, and we truly know something only when we can put it in our own words. Because of these truths, we need to plan lessons that require students to teach others using their own words to explain information. This being true, you need to plan who can learn from whom, who works best with each other, and what knowledge do students bring to the class that can be shared with others. Your lesson planning includes establishing an inviting environment for learning. Decide what positive elements can be a part of the classroom. Environmental factors such as temperature, lighting, neatness, availability of materials, and arrangement of furniture contribute to lesson success. For example, active lessons require space in which to move around. Adults need to be able to adjust their workspace during the course of the lesson. They need to be able to see each other, work together, and hold conversations. Lesson planning involves giving thought to classroom arrangement based on the types of learning activities being used. You may have little control over these environmental factors, so do the best you can with what you have to make the learning environment as pleasant and inviting as possible. There are so many considerations to make when you plan effective lessons for adults. The following questions review all the factors involved in the process of lesson planning presented in this video. Why do we need to plan lessons? To provide a map to get where you need to go. To meet time frames. To maintain focus. To assure coverage of necessary material. What are the benefits of strong lesson plans? You stay focused on the lesson outcome. You have a framework for reflection. You can be creative. You are confident in your contribution to the adult's learning. What factors promote improvement in the classroom? Instructors' willingness to try new ideas. Instructors' devotion to teaching. Instructors' own instructional resources. Instructors' experiments with different teaching strategies. How does lesson planning help with class pacing? Planning helps an instructor recognize how much material can be covered in a class. Planning tells the instructor how time should be divided. Planning helps the instructor prioritize lesson content from most to least important in terms of student relevance. Planning allows content to be categorized by level of importance. What is worth knowing? What should the student know if time allows? What could the student know? Not essential. What are the basic steps in planning a lesson? Assess student level of entry to the lesson. Set goals. Present instruction. Conduct formal assessment. Include students in the lesson planning. Their rich experiences and knowledge influence their goals for learning and greatly affect the success of the lesson.
Yes, extensive lesson planning can be a very creative task. We need to recognize the factors involved and then put our own twist to them to make our classes what they should be. To gain professionally from this experience, I suggest that you plan in teams, and then you can grow professionally by learning from one another as you share ideas, problems, and reflections. Oh yes, and make your lesson plans as adult-centered as possible. Lesson planning is a professional habit that produces the learning both we and our students desire.